Was severely wounded and is one of 4 survivors of the September 16, 2013 Navy Yard shooting. In her book, Standing Still in a Culture of Mass Shootings, Jennifer brings us face to face with the Navy Yard shooting. She sustained a point-blank gunshot blast, yet, by the grace of God, she survived. Her book details the harrowing experience, but also the heroism and dedication exhibited by many men and women who helped save her life. To explain how she became the warrior she is today, Jennifer provides an entertaining, yet often humorous sketch explaining what it's like to grow up in America from the 1950s to the 70s. A native of Ohio, Jennifer has served as a United States Navy civil servant for 26 years, progressing from the Program Analyst to various programs of management positions within the Naval Sea Systems Command, or NAVSEA, the Navy's perimeter system acquisition and fleet support organizations. So, please join me in welcoming retired Chief of Staff of the United States Navy and author, Ms. Jennifer Bennett.
So how are you all this morning? Well, come on, kids. Come on. How are you this morning?
Great. How are you?
Okay, good. I'm great. Life is a blessing. I think you all hopefully will know that, right? Right? So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different aspects of the shooting. I'm going to also talk about law enforcement, lessons learned. How did Aaron Alexis, the shooter, get missed? And how did law enforcement deal with him and within our building? And I'll tell you what our building was like prior to the shooting in regards to culture, security, right? Because if I've got it correctly, you all are in some form of law enforcement criminology, correct? I see shaking heads, okay. So I'm going to go to those aspects, right, so that you can kind of capture that depending on where you're going in your life. So first, we're going to show the video, and then I will step from that because I want you to be where it was that day so that you can see what chaos looks like and what it's like for law enforcement running towards an event, all right?
Another mass shooting in this country, this time close to the center of our government.
All the markings of a horrifying attack.
So we know of a second officer shot.
We are reporting this morning that there are multiple wounded and multiple fatalities.
It started as a routine Monday at the Navy Yard. Alexis shows his pass and is waved in by a security guard.
On the 16th of September 2013, I went to work, normal day, and about 8:10, started hearing pop, pop, pop. And I got out of my cube seat and walked over to the atrium. At that moment, another young woman across the atrium who I work with called out to me and said, "Jen, I think somebody's shooting." Out the door I went, and when I hit the top stair of that mid-level, there was the shooter. He was standing on the stairs looking up, and when I came to a halt, I was shot.
We got a report on the 4th floor, a male with a shotgun, multiple shots fired, multiple people down.
There's an inch and a half that you can be wounded in your arm and not lose your arm or die. And that buckshot from that sawed-off shotgun went in that inch and a half. The medical community continued to tell me it was impossible for me to be alive. And so that was just more evidence to me that God was with me on the stairwell. He was there, that He could put it right where it needed to go because He was ready for me to do something. What was different for me than from others, they panicked. They were running, they were screaming at him, they were fleeing for their lives, but I wasn't frightened. I was at complete peace. I had this slight pressure on my shoulders to stand still. I knew God was with me. My experiences have opened doors for me. God has used that day for me to be fruitful for Him. He was 8 steps from me, gun pointed up, sawed-off shotgun, and I looked him in the eye, and he shot me. Now, you would say, now why would God shoot you? Well, it's His way of showing me how He works. I call it my Psalm 139 purpose. See, He promises in Psalm 139, He has a plan for us, that He created us specifically, that each one of us are unique. And through all of this, God made it clear to me how he works. It's important to learn how to maintain a life of purpose in the midst of pain and adversity. It's suffering and pain and adversity that I had to go through, which are part of a believer's walk. There is nothing that God won't do for you when he sees your believer heart. A question for you today: are you all in? Are you ready to tell God you are ready for whatever? When tough comes, learn to say, why not me? And in return, he will do amazing things and show you his miracles. And next year, you might be the keynote speaker. So you can tell I'm a person of faith. And that really is up to you as an individual where you stand in your faith. But I will tell you that resiliency comes in from where you are grounded, right? You need to find your grounding. I won't tell you what that is, but you will see evidence of why I talk about my faith. On that day, faith was very much an important part of living through being shot and how I see myself in relation to that event, okay? Standing in front of a shooter who literally is 8 to 10 steps from you with a sawed-off shotgun, double-aught shot. If you're not a hunter would tell you a double-aught shot takes down a full-grown adult male deer. And I was shot point blank with that, okay? So I'm a walking miracle because no one in law enforcement or in the military had ever met someone who was shot point blank with double-aught shot and walked away from it and kept their arm and were living. So you have to ask yourself, how is that possible? And that's where faith comes, okay? So that's why you see me say what I have to say, because I am deeply faithful. And I understand my relationship with God and how he lives through me. And so that's why you're going to hear that. But it is as much part of my story of resilience as anything else. So let's talk about that day very quickly. So the Navy Yard, my organization has 5,000 people. There are probably 10,000 people on the Washington Navy Yard. The Navy Yard sits on the river. The Capitol building is about 3 miles away. It is a classified environment. It's called a federal reservation. So you have a lot of military, Marine Corps, Navy, no Army. The Marine Corps 8th and I is just up the street. It's where they have the silent drill team. So this is, a military environment. Badges, IDs, guards, weapons. It's a safe place. It's a place you have to have an ID to get on the base. It's an ID you have to get in the building. So he's an insider threat, okay? So active shooter, insider threat. All training that people do these days came from the Navy Yard shooting. Every federal agency, and maybe, I don't know if you guys do active shooter training, it all came from the Navy Yard shooting, because unlike Columbine and the Florida high school shooting and churches and other mass shootings, this one was different because it was an insider threat with an ID. And so that morning, he came to work. He put his badge on the turnstile. He walked in. He walked so that the guard, his name is Mike Rigel, could not see what he was doing, right? He had a huge bag. A law enforcement conversation is called RAMs. And the RAMs, we didn't do it very often. A RAM is when you make a person stop, open their bag, look at it, or make them go through a magnetometer, a metal detector. Well, we don't have metal detectors in our building. And so he knew his bag wouldn't get checked. He walked in. The first time you note that something's not right with him is when he hits the camera just before he gets on the elevator. He goes to the 4th deck or floor. That's where he worked. He went into the bathroom. He took out his weaponry. He loaded it. At the same time, he took out an empty pill bottle, because this is about mental illness. many of you, if you go into criminology, law enforcement, social work, you're going to run into mental illness, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. He took out his empty pill bottle, he put it on the counter, and in it was a thumb drive. It had 3 letters, and I'll tell you about those letters later. He loaded his weapon. He came out of the bathroom. He walked down the hallway. He started with the group that he was working with, right? He only spoke once. He asked a young woman if one specific person was there that day. That person was on leave. That specific morning, they were having a meeting specifically about him and his job performance. He was a contractor. And that young woman decided not to participate in that meeting, so she was at her cube. He opened fire. He passed by her, shot the guy behind her. She got, so if you don't know what that ammo looks like, it explodes, right? It has little ball bearings in it. So the count has to do with the number of ball bearings in that ammo. And so it exploded. She got 1 ball bearing right here in her chest, on her shoulder. The young woman in the cubicle next to her, it went through the wall. She got a ball bearing in the back of her neck because she was ducking. He then proceeded to do avenue of ease of shooting. Whoever he came along, he shot. Either shot at or he actually killed them. So the preponderance of deaths were with his working group, okay? He wandered the building. My building was a block long, 5 floors of livable space, so that's 5 blocks of cubicles and offices. So there's a lot of targets. At that point in time, active shooter didn't exist. People ran out of the building, hit the fire alarm door, out they went, and it set off the fire alarm. So now people are being pulled out into the spaces, which is just opposite now of what's taught, right? That's hide, fight, or flight. That's typically what's taught. So now you have lots of people coming out to respond to a fire drill, and you've got a shooter. And that's why I was shot. I did not know there was really a shooter. It didn't really connect to me when that young woman yelled, "Jen, it sounds like someone's shooting," because my building is safe, right? Your environment is safe, and so you don't expect it. And so as identified, the other part of our building is that has 2 atriums open. So it's 5 floors up, open, right? All open space. Where I worked on the 5th deck, and it was from the 2nd floor or deck up, open. So lots of noise, right? Reverberating through the building. And as an employee, you learn to close your ear to the noise level, because we had lots of events in those atriums. Tables, chairs, clattering, noise. You learn to not pay attention to it. So hearing another noise that captures your attention is unusual. And that was an unusual noise. So I got up, I walked along the atrium, and my coworker who's across the atrium, that's when she yelled. If I had looked down the floor below, because I can see it, I would have seen him running, because that's where he started, just below our floor. That's why she could hear it reverberating up to where she was. So she took her people out. I said, well, this must be serious. The alarm went off, and then what we call the big voice went off and announced there was a fire. So that's what my mind clicked into, fire. And so I collected my bags. I had a boot on my leg. I took the boot off. I put on my girl sandals. It's the only girly thing about me. And made a decision about where I was going to go. So when you're in your building, depending on where you are, you have to decide how are you getting out. I had a stairwell next to my cubicle, just down the hall. And then there was stairwell across the building, so I had to cross the building, get to it. The stairwell that I was next to went out into a closed, fenced-in road. 3/4 of our building is off the federal reservation, so only the front doors are actually on the Navy Yard. The rest of it, the land was sold And our building actually sat off of the federal reservation. So when you went out the back door, you were now on public land, and no longer on the federal reservation. So that's not safe, right? Plus I couldn't get back to my car. So that alleyway had a 16-foot fence, iron gate fence that's rarely ever opened, an 8-foot brick wall, and then a hurricane fence that's locked. So when you go out in that alleyway, you're stuck. And I used to call it the shooting gallery. What I didn't know until 4 days later was one of the people who died was in that alley. He was hiding in the weeds because there were some weeds along the brick wall. And he stood up, and when he stood up, the shooter was standing at that back door and shot him, dead center, right? And the Navy captain or commander that was standing next to him watched him drop, because Aaron Alexis had been in the Navy. He was a marksman. And so that is when it turned into the shooting gallery. I didn't learn that until 4 days afterward, but I always referred to that because it locks you in, you're stuck. So security-wise, as an employee, I don't want to be stuck. And so I crossed the building. I passed a Navy captain. His name was Chip Zawislak. I didn't really know Chip. We met in the Xerox room. That's kind of like the coffee class. You get your work, you talk to each other, and you move on. I ran into another guy named Mike. He was the floor warden. I helped him with his vest. I went out the door. Now I'm on the 5th deck, so I have 3 flights of steps to the 4th floor. The 4th floor has a little long hallway. The stairwell is an open atrium as well, so no walls, all windows. And so if I had looked over, I would have seen him. So the railing just, keeps going down till the 1st deck. I clip-clop my way down those steps, sliding my hand, and this is where faith came for me. That morning, God gave me a hymn. I was humming it. I was really at a place complete peace. I slid my hand around that railing, and I came to the top of that middle level, so 3rd deck, 4th deck. I could look up, and I could look down. When I slid my hand around and I stood at that top of that stair, he was standing on the stairs with the weapon pointed up. I was an avenue of opportunity because of the fire drill. When I came to that stop, because I was at peace, because that's who I am, so you're made, each of you, very specifically. You have personalities, you have inherent knowledge and skills that you don't even know why you know what you know. But it's how you're made, right? You're in school doing an education that uses some of those very inherent skills. And so you've been made a very specific way. God made me a warrior. I have always been a warrior, even when I was little. I'm unafraid of anyone or anything. I'm very confident in who I am and how I'm made. I'm unafraid. I worry for nothing. Okay, how many people do you meet who are that confident in themselves? But that is who I am. That's how I'm made. The humor there is that my Navy captains used to take my business card and write Gunny. So like a Marine Corps Gunny sergeant, that was my personality at work. My 2-star admiral called me Xena the Warrior. So that's the imagery you need to know. That's who I am. And so I was unafraid anyway. But God also had me at peace so that I would stand still and not run, right? Or try to fight. I needed to stand still for a very specific reason, because while I was standing on that step and I'm looking at him, now he and I looked each other eye to eye. He didn't just automatically shoot, it was seconds. So people who are in battles, military, even law enforcement will tell you when you get into a battle, when you're in the fight, it's as if everything stops down. It's like, how many of you watched The Matrix? Anybody see The Matrix? That's a hands up, a yes. Okay, a couple of you. The Matrix is a movie that shows Keanu Reeves slowing down. Everything slows down. And that's what happens when you're in a battle. It just slows down and your mind captures every sequencing of event like a movie. Click, 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 click. And so I was standing still looking at him, and my security background kicked in. So I have over 20 years of security background in information security protection, physical security, cyber security, personnel security. I deal a lot with law enforcement, so this is part of who I am and my education. And so that training kicked in, and I said to myself, talking to myself in my head, Jen, this is important, ID him, right? Because that's what you're going to want to know. What does he look like? What's the weapon look like? So I ID'd him. I ID'd the weapon. And in the meantime, we're just looking at each other. And the man I saw was not an evil man. I saw a broken man. He wasn't angry. His eyes were a light brown. And as we stood and looked at each other, I didn't see an angry person. I saw a broken person, and my heart broke for him. I saw what hopelessness looks like in a person when they don't have anything grounded and they're lost and they see no value in themselves or anyone else. I saw what a mental illness looks like, and that's the person I saw. And so finally, I went like this. He had to do something. One of us had to make a move. And when I did this, he made a decision. I watched his face. His brow furrowed real deep, his eyes went dark, and he made the decision to shoot me. I watched him pull the trigger. I watched the blast come out of the weapon. I watched it hit me. When it hit me, I closed my eyes. I took a couple steps back. When I did that, he thought, okay, she's done. He ran down to the first deck. And I'll tell you what happened when he got there. When I opened my eyes, I was screaming. That was an automatic physical. I said to myself, Jen, stop screaming, not helping. And then I said, now I've got to assess my wound. And so I pulled, because all of this is shredded. He blew my thumb in half, like you slice a hot dog. He blew my 2 fingers. I still have the scars. He blew a 5x5 hole in my arm, blew it through. You could see through it. He blew across my chest. I had 3 bags on my shoulder. They were now on the floor, and they're all leather, and that went through the leather, just cut it right in half, so now it's all on the floor. What I didn't know was Mike, the floor warden, I was in such a place of peace, humming my hymn. I didn't know he was behind me on the stairs. I didn't learn that until about 4 or 5 months later. He was standing about a foot behind me. And when I was shot, everything went all over him. So that's getting shot without being shot. Even though it was an open atrium, the captain standing on the 4th, right up there at the door, he couldn't see the shooter. Mike could not see the shooter. So when I came to a stop, they couldn't figure out why I stopped. So imagine responding to a fire drill and then watching your coworker get shot. That PTSD was huge for them. When that happened, and my eyes were still closed, Mike ran up the steps, and he went on up back up to the steps where we came from. So that's why I didn't know he was there. When I opened my eyes, the captain was standing there frozen. And so he's trying to get the door open. So one of the security aspects of that day was during fire drills, our doors lock down. So you have to use a badge to get in anyway. But in fire drills, they lock them down. So if you have a fire in a stairwell, you're done. There's nowhere to go because you can't get out because they've locked the door down. So he's tugging at the door. And I finally looked up at him, and he turned and went to run. And I said, wait for me. That's the first time I really spoke. He was trying to find a way to get out. And so I assessed my wound. I said to myself, well, he shot my arm off, and my jacket's keeping it in place. And more or less, that was true. So I grabbed my arm, and I said, well, I need to go. And there's faith that goes with this story, but I will let it go for here. But I walked from the 3rd all the way to the 6th by myself with 5x5 hole, gaping wounds, split thumb, And I walked upstairs, got to the 6th floor, and I found Mike. He was hiding in the stairwell. He put his arm around me. We went up to the 7th floor. The 7th floor was the only door in the building that went out onto the roof. We went out onto the roof. As we were going, the captain came back in. He thought he was going to have to come down and get me. He was surprised to find me. We went out on the roof. They sat me down. So there's a part of the building. They sat me down. Two of them sat next to me. There was another man named McConnon. I knew McConnon. And he stood up. And Michael sat here, and he grabbed my hand, and he closed my thumb. Right? He held my thumb together. And then the captain pulled away what was left of my clothing and took off his little half-black jacket. And he took it and he stuffed it into the holes on both sides. So you come from a generation, I don't know, how many of you know Elmer Fudd? You ever seen an Elmer Fudd cartoon? Oh my. So in my world, us old people, Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny, right? And Elmer Fudd is always chasing Bugs Bunny. And what does he have? A shotgun. And he always shoots Bugs Bunny, and you get this hole, right? You can see through Bugs Bunny. And that was actually funny. Well, I was Bugs Bunny that day. And there is humor in tragedy, okay? You guys need to know that. And if you're going to law enforcement or the criminal world or even social work, there is humor even when it's difficult. The question is where's your mindset and your heart to be able to see the other pieces that come with what's scary, right? Scary, tragic. And so as Chip was stuffing, he looked me in the eye and he actually said, "Jen, I can see through you." So we thought that was funny. See the humor? I know it doesn't sound tragic to you guys, but it's humor. The other thing that he said to me was when he stuffed in, so on the collar of his jacket, he had his eagle devices, right? Little eagle. So he was a Navy captain, or in the Army it's a colonel, in the Marine Corps it's a colonel. And he stuffed in and he looked at me and he went, "Oh, Jen, I hope I didn't hurt you." He said, "I just stuffed in my eagle devices. Does it hurt?" Like, I'm gonna know that hurts, right? I mean, I'm blown, this is blown, and I said, "Don't worry about it, it's okay." And so we were on the roof an hour and a half. So when you see mass shootings, it's not like instantaneous, okay, everything's good. And the cops and the law enforcement rush in. It takes time. We're on the roof an hour and a half. And in that hour and a half, we told jokes. We watched the world stop. So if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., the Navy Yard, you have a bridge over here. You have a bridge over here. You have 295 that runs. You've got the river. And we were watching everything come to a complete halt. Helicopters are taking off and landing over here. They've stopped all traffic. And so we're watching the world come to complete stop. We've got a blue and white helicopter flying overhead. That was the park police. We tried to get them to pay attention. They wouldn't come near us. We later learned that they saw us, law enforcement saw us as the enemy. Remember, they're in a battle. Law enforcement is in a battle. And they saw us as possible shooters. They didn't know who the shooter was. So in mass shootings or even shootings, law enforcement doesn't know who the bad guy is. So when you're entering a building, everyone is the bad guy, right? And so we also learned later on, we all had dots on the middle of our foreheads from across the river. They had sharpshooters. That was interesting to learn. And because they didn't know who we were. They could see I was wounded, but they didn't know I was one of those shooters who got shot by law enforcement who had rushed into the building. So at the hour and 10 mark, I looked at Captain Zwislak. We were forehead to forehead, nose to nose. And I said, "I hope your wife doesn't mind," because we're very intimate at this point in time. So in a tragedy, and if you're going to law enforcement, you're going to be really close to the people you work with. Well, I wasn't really close to Chip until that moment. He was just a co-worker in the Xerox room. And he helped save my life because he staunched the bleeding. When he put in his jacket, he held that for an hour and a half. He's pressing to stop the bleeding. And we're all covered, okay? And so I looked at him and I said, Chip, I hope your wife won't mind, because we're very intimate at this point in time. And he said, no, she won't mind. And then he said, I have good news. He said, your eyes aren't dilated, you're gonna be okay. At the hour and 20 mark, the SWAT team comes through the door. They bang open with their long guns. This helicopter all of a sudden shows up just like the movies. Didn't even hear it coming. And sitting on is a park policeman with his long gun. And they're dropping SWAT team onto the roof. And so they come around the corner. 3 came our way, the rest went across the rest of the building. And at this point in time, my focus is really kind of like this. It's kind of narrow. I didn't think I was going to die, but I knew there's going to come a time that this isn't going to go well for me, because I've lost a lot of blood, and I was as white as a piece of paper you were going to get, right? My color is gone. So when they realize we're not the enemy, one of them drops to his knee, looks us in the eye, and they take apart what's left of my clothing. And then he goes through his bag. This is called, he wasn't the Boy Scout. And he actually looked at Chip and I and said, do either of you have scissors? And we just kind of looked at him and looked at each other and started to laugh and said, no, we don't have scissors. The other SWAT guy was kind of hanging over us, leaning against the building, so kind of created a shadow for me. He dropped his bag and said, I have scissors, take what you want. So his name was Matthew Cooney. He's an Army reservist and he's a park policeman. And so he was also an EMT. And so he took out the products, he filled my wounds, he bandaged my thumb and my 2 fingers. And then the guy hanging over me said, would you get in a helicopter? And I, being the person that I am, I said, 007 am I. I love helicopters, always wanted to be in one, but didn't know this was how I was going to do it. But yeah, I'll get in the helicopter. I thought they were going to put me in the helicopter. Instead, they picked me up and they took me over to a basket that was 3 foot by 1.5 foot with the big orange buoys on it. This is the one that they go and they drop into the water like the Coast Guard, and people climb in and they pull it out and then pull it up into the helicopter. That's what I got put in. And when they put me in it, and I sat down, the helicopter, so you saw the helicopter in there, that was me. It went straight up, they put it underneath the helicopter, and they've never done this before. And then they took off 70 miles an hour. I was not tied in. I was free flying in these 1.5 foot metal basket. They went 70 miles an hour straight to the hospital across DC. I started fishtailing, and then they pulled me up some more and tied me in. When I got to the hospital, they pulled me in, and I met a guy in blue. His name was Dave Tolson, and I met Sergeant Abate, who had the long gun sitting on the railing. And then they asked me that question, did you see the shooter? Can you tell us what he looks like? And I told him what he looked like. So now they had an idea of who they were looking for. And then they put me out. I did what I call the movie thing, and I won't spend a lot of time here because I want to get to other things for you. They put the basket on the ground. The hospital had never seen a basket before, because normally they take you to the bridge, they take you out, put you in a gurney that's inside the helicopter, and then they take you to the hospital. And then it's a 1-for-1 shift from the gurney to the gurney that the hospital brings. So they didn't know what to do with me, and I'm watching them be frozen. I'm looking at Dave Tolson trying to get the O-ring open so that this basket will open up so they could get at me. And I finally said to myself, okay, enough of this. I put up my hand to him and I said, if you'll take my right hand, I'll just get out myself. And I stood up And when I stood up, they started moving. They put me on a gurney. I hit the doors just like the movie. There were 200 medical personnel in the room. My 10, 12, or however many ran off with me. And then they began to strip me naked. And I was being snarky. In the movies, they show people out. I was not that girl. I was engaging with every person who was putting their hands on me in some way. I'm listening to the surgeons count my wounds, describe my room, so I'm listening to all that's going around me. They got to my chest and the tone of the room changed. And I said to myself, well, that one must be serious. And so then off to x-rays. And then eventually they said, how do we get hold of your husband? The young woman who had the pellet back here had been taken to that hospital along with the policeman. The policeman had taken a shot right above his knees, and it literally just about blew his legs off. And they had to carry him down the stairs. So he had gotten to the hospital before me, so he was already in surgery. Jennifer was in one of the other curtained rooms. And when Philip came, he said, I'm here to see Jennifer. And they took him to her. She's 23 years old, single, actually quite beautiful. And I could hear him talking to her. And she's saying, but I'm not married. And he's going like, she's not the right one, right? So confusion. And so they eventually bring him to me. And he burst into tears. My Marine burst into tears, right? And then I made a joke, which was very unkind. But and so then he and I connected. And then the medical community came. The anesthesiologist spent a lot of time with me. And then they put me to sleep. The next time I woke up was Tuesday morning. I sat up. My sister, who is an RN, an operating room nurse, had flown from Knoxville, Tennessee, and was sitting in my room. They had me hooked up to morphine, and she got me into lots of trouble. She said, let's test it out. Let's see how many times you can get the drip to go. Yeah, they came and took it from me, but it's my sister, older sister. But when I sat up, I looked at her, and I said, it is well with my soul. You don't need to worry about me. God has me. I don't have PTSD. How is that possible? The two psychiatrists they sent to me were like, I am unafraid. I don't have PTSD. I am transparent. When I'm done, you guys can ask me any question you want. There is nothing I won't share with you. Nothing. Because you're not going to learn your craft, your trade, or become who you're going to become unless you ask me hard questions, and I'm going to be relational with you and share it with you. That's how we exchange and treat each other in a good relationship. So now let's talk about law enforcement. So, our building's secure. Insider threat. So how secure are we really, right? After the shooting, here are the things that changed. They put in a magnetometer, but they only wanted the guests to go through it, not the employees. Make any sense to you? Makes no sense to me. They increased our RAMs, but the employees complained because it backed people up in the morning. So now it became inconvenient. It's as if they had sort of forgotten why we were doing the safety mechanism. For law enforcement, communication was an issue. Our building is 5 blocks long, filled with cubicles and doors. Law enforcement had never been on the Navy Yard. So you had every kind of law enforcement you could have, especially in the DC area. It's a federal reservation, so the people who actually owned that in law enforcement was the Park Police. So now you have the Park Police, the Metropolitan Police, the military police, and other agencies, FBI, pick one, NCIS, competing for who's in charge, right? We had a command center on the base where when they finally got the admiral out, the 3-star admiral, he's called the commander, when they finally got him out, they took him to the command center. But the command center on base really didn't have great communication with what was happening in the building. Columbine taught law enforcement how you go into a building when there's a shooter. They relearned in our building new techniques. So what they learned was it didn't matter what branch of law enforcement you were in, they started putting together teams, running into the building, different folks. Now you have locked doors, nobody has a badge. How does law enforcement get into a building that has locked doors? So when the shooter left me and went down to the first deck, he went out into the lobby and he met Mike Rigel. Mike Rigel was not your normal rent-a-cop or security guard. He was a former DC detective who'd gone to Iraq to train the police force, and he had returned and didn't want to become another metropolitan policeman again. So he was looking for a job. So he was a very well-trained man. He was skilled at what he did. He was not your norm. He had a 9mm. And here's one of the mistakes that they made. When law enforcement rushed in, Mike asked them, "Do you want me to come with you?" And they said, "No, stay here," as people are flooding out, right? People are running, panicking, screaming. We had injuries where people were tripping over each other, right? Trying to get out the door because they're in a panic. They said, "No, stay." But they didn't leave anybody with Mike. He had no partner. When the shooter came into the lobby where Mike was, his focus was on people, trying to save people, because that's who he is. The shooter walked up on him and shot him point blank. That's a lesson learned. Never not have a partner. Never do anything alone. The shooter took his 9mm, went out the back door and killed the man in the alleyway. Then he went back to the third deck and was loading and unloading his weapon. And so law enforcement now, they take Mike's badge and they open doors, jam them open, so now everybody can flow through. Remember I told you the cacophony of noise in this building? Now you have all those radios going off, right? All the police radios, all the noise now is reverting through the building. And when a shot would be taken, it's bouncing through the building and the policemen are talking to each other. Where was it? Where is it? Where are you? What end of the building are you on? Okay, so we had color codes in our building. Our floors have, by floor, east, west, north, south, and then a room number. But if you don't know the building as law enforcement, you have no idea where you are, right? So that got changed after. We color-coded the building, and we made the numbering system on the wall so that if law enforcement ran into the building, they could see a sign and know where they were in the building. I'm in the blue section, east side, I'm in the orange section, I'm in whatever color, right? What floor. So now you have all this noise going on, and you have high panic, fog of war. Because as law enforcement, you're in a battle, you're in a war. You don't know who you're really looking for, you don't know how many, right? People are hiding everywhere. Our NCIS agents, so we had 4 NCIS agents embedded at NAVSEA. And he told me they'd be running along and all of a sudden they'd see shoes underneath the cubicle. Well, they had to stop to see were there people attached to those shoes, because the women at work would bring all of their shoes and line them under the cubicles. So all you could see were their closet of shoes, right? So it stopped them from hunting to see who's in there, right? People were locked in conference room. Our doors don't have locks. Only the offices had a lock. So those who had cubicles, who didn't get out, ran into conference rooms, and they literally would take the conference room tables or whatever they could find and shove them against the doors. And then they would go hide in the corners. So now law enforcement is dealing with can't get door open. They don't know where he is. And so that went on for hours. Hours. It took them until midnight to clean that building out after the shooter was killed, because they couldn't get the people to come out. Because one of the things the shooter was doing was knocking on the door to see if they could get someone to answer. So they're terrified. So the other piece is, how does a law enforcement communicate with a frightened civilian or whoever's behind the door? How do you communicate with them? So that had to be learned, had to teach the people in the building, and law enforcement needs to change how they address the people in the room. How do you identify yourself, right? So at one point in time, someone took charge and said, turn off your radios. And they had to make the building go silent so they could try to figure out if they could find him, okay? So communication. The other thing that was occurring is the alarm is going off. So you've got this big voice announcing a fire. You've got all the red lights and all the sirens going off. Well, the only place to turn it off was in the lobby. And nobody wanted to cross the lobby, to include the firemen, the policemen, and the civilians who had the key to it. Nobody wanted to cross the lobby because they were afraid they'd get shot. So that alarm went off the entire time they were in that building. Remember, I just told you they didn't get out till midnight? So adding to the cacophony of confusion and chaos for law enforcement and the civilians was the noise. So now that device has been changed. It's on the outside of the building, and it's connected to the command center, so that when it goes off, the command center can turn it off, right? So those are some of the lessons learned. Communication is incredibly important when you are doing whatever it is you're doing, and it's an event that's urgent that way. So the communication part is something that the Washington, D.C. metro area, the police force, and others have had me come and talk about. How do we communicate what's happening in the building? For law enforcement, so the young man who sat in front of me, the park policeman, the things they saw made some of them not want to come back to work, the PTSD, right? Law enforcement has high PTSD, so that's why I say to you, whatever you're going to do, social work or in the criminal justice system, you better figure out for yourself what grounds you. Where do you dig in when it gets really tough? And how do you, in your mental capability and your heart, deal with what comes at you? So Matthew didn't come back to work for 4 months because one of the things that they were told when they found someone still alive, they had to step over them. They were told you're not allowed to save them because we hadn't found the shooter, and the shooter was the primary target. So here are these people, because you're just people, right? You're just people. You're stepping over someone who grabs your pant leg, and this happened, grabs your pant leg and says, help me. What do you do? And they're told you have to leave them and have to shake that hand off of that person who they know is going to die. And they have to keep running. How do you deal with that? Where do you dig in so that when you walk away from that and a day or two later, you have that imagery of that park policeman who was so good for me, he didn't go back to work for 4 months. The things he had to see and experience so harmed him emotionally that he was seeing the counseling and the psychiatrist and the park police. When I saw him 4 months later and told him I was alive because of him, right? He and Chip, and what a good job he had done, and what the surgeon said about him packing my wounds helped him put sense to it, and he returned to work, okay? We have to remember our law enforcement are just people. They have children, they have wives, they have husbands, they have cats, they have dogs. They're people who are facing some of the most ugly pieces that you're ever going to see in society, okay? And so the chief of police of the yard, his name is Michael McKinney, I got asked to come sit with him because he was one of them that had the pant leg grabbed, and he made a mistake. When he left her, he ran down the hall, his mistake. The shooter is running past him. He goes after the shooter. His mistake was he turned around and looked at her, and she's looking at him. That is forever in his mind. Her sight, because he was the last person she saw while she was still alive. The NCIS agent, he had a trauma doctor with him, a Navy trauma doctor happened to be on the yard. He even had his bag. They went in together, and he came across someone he worked with, and they sat with her, and the doctor couldn't save her. He had to leave that job eventually, and he went somewhere else in NCIS, because that's the imagery he had in his head. So as you go into your career field, you need to think about some of these things. And that's why when I talk about faith, I'm encouraging to understand you have to have something that's in your core that helps you take that next step to be a survivor, because you're a survivor just like I am. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. Because I've moved beyond. I don't actually even remember this date, okay? It's not important to me. It's a piece of thing that happened to me that God allowed for purposes that I understand. I mean, I'm standing in front of you. That's part of my purpose, to share with you knowledge, right? To help you grow, to help you understand, both as a person and as a career person, right? That's purpose. I have lots of purposes. I mentor lots of young men and women. God just sends them to me, and I mentor them. I invest into them. That is going to become your purposes as you go into law enforcement and social work. You're going to see things that are going to break your heart. Gird yourselves, find what you believe, set it in your core so that you understand what your purpose is and how God has made you as you walk this career journey, okay? Aaron Alexis died. He came to die. Mental illness. You are going to come across mental illness in all kinds of ways. We as a culture don't address mental illness. We shy away from it. But I bet you guys know people or have met someone who's struggling, right? Whether it's chemical, they're imbalanced something in their body, whether they're having terrible time at home and it causes them to behave in a way. Mental illness. You're responsible for the person sitting next to you. Do you know that? At work, nobody cared about Aaron Alexis. He was a contractor. The culture was toxic. Toxic means it's a harsh place to work, driven by its leaders, right? All they want is to get the product and the thing done. We built, NAVSEA is responsible for all shipped submarines and carriers, rib boats, whatever is out on the water, NAVSEA builds it. We contract for it, we develop the systems, and we design the craft, right? That's what that job is. That was the focus. But it isn't about how are you today? You're struggling today. Can I do something to help you? Right? You are responsible for the people you're around. He got missed. Nobody knew him. He had no friends. Because he was a contractor, he actually lived in, I think, Arizona. He lived in hotels. His supervisor knew he was mentally ill. A couple of weeks before that, he was having mental issues in Norfolk, where he was doing some service. They flew him to Newport, Rhode Island. He started having issues there. The police were called on him. The base was called, and the base said, well, he's a contractor. He's not one of ours, not our problem. He was in the Navy. They tried to get him out a couple of times. He was mentally ill in the Navy. His sister identified He had been mentally ill his whole life. His parents didn't help him. Even when his siblings, he had 2 sisters, asked his parents to please help him, they didn't do it. Nowhere where he worked helped him. They just wanted him out. He was in trouble with law his whole entire life, always a weapon. Why didn't anybody see him? Why didn't somebody who worked with him see him? Why was he invisible? And that's what I captured when I saw his face. What he did was evil. He was not evil. He allowed evil to use him, using the chosen tool. The weapon wasn't evil, it's how it got used was evil. Why didn't we see him? Why didn't his coworkers know him? So in my building, there are 3,000 people. NAVSEA is 5,000 people in the Navy Yard. It's 81 or 82,000 people around the world. It's a huge organization. In that 3,000 building, I probably knew 2,500 of them. I was known for having a heart for my people. I ran a 500-person organization for my 2-star admiral. I knew my people. I knew whether they were married, whether they had a dog, a cat, they had children, what their hobbies were, right? That is your responsibility, to love the person who you're next to, right? Get to know the people that you're around, your teachers, your superintendent, your principal. They're people. Learn about them. Be interested in them. Have a heart for them, because when you guys go out into your job, do you know how you become successful? You get known for caring for the other people around you. When people know you care about them, that you honestly care about them, it isn't about being popular. It's about ensuring that your workforce, your coworker are healthy, and you can capture something's happening to them so you can get them help, right? So that they don't kill themselves, they don't kill someone else, and that they're thriving. That is our responsibility to each other. And those are the things that I've taken away from being a career Navy employee. My job is to care for my people, being a servant, right? So you guys are going into service. You should have a servant's heart. Go look up what servant heart means. The best leader has a heart for their people. They serve their people. That means your people are more important. And that's the relationship of what you guys are going to go do. But we missed Aaron Alexis. His supervisor put him back in play. Even though she knew he was mentally ill, didn't get him help. She sent him to our building. He'd only been in our building 2 weeks. He'd been in the Pentagon before that. The last part of him is I met people who dealt with him every day of the week prior to the shooting. He did IT, right? He came and fixed your computer. Navy captain came to me and said, I feel like it's my fault. I didn't catch this. He said he came in to work on my computer. He said, Jen, I was really busy. I picked up my stuff off my desk. I went over to my table. I put it down. He came in and said, how are you today? The captain barely acknowledged him. He fixed his computer. He said, is there anything else I can do for you? And the captain said, no, it's all good. Picked up his stuff and went back to work. He didn't even acknowledge him. That happened to him all week long. I met the woman who he serviced for 2.5 hours on the Friday before the Monday he came and shoot us. He'd already bought the weapon. He was about to go to Home Depot and purchase the products to saw it off. And on Friday, she spent 2.5 hours with him. And in that 2.5 hours, because she's kind of that leader, she was getting to know him. And that he began to talk about his mother and his relationship with his mother. And then he was done, And he said, anything else? And she said, no. And she said, Jen, I wish I'd continued the conversation because I feel like maybe if I'd spent more time with him, he wouldn't have come in and killed us, right? On that Monday, he came in and he killed us. Okay, let's talk about the letters. In the hospital, so the letters were not a known thing to the common population. Because I was shot, I spent a lot of time with the FBI and the NCIS. I spent a lot of time in my hospital room. And so they brought me 2 of the letters, and they read them to me. He had written 3, 1 to his mother and 2 general. And in his general letters, he identified why he did what he did. He identified a harsh working environment. He identified he'd been treated and mistreated. He identified, and this is the mental illness, he believed that the Navy was piping frequencies into his head, and that's why he was hearing the voices. He felt it was the Navy doing that to him. He belonged to a group on the internet that believed that the government was piping frequencies into people's heads. And so, you know, he had that kind of behavior and mindset. And so he talked about that in his letters. But what I clued in on was how he felt he'd been treated harshly in our culture. And the culture that I worked in was toxic. It still is today. Okay? So you are the culture you want in your organization. You are the culture you want in this school. If you want a culture where people care about each other, you treat people well, and you have a heart for others, you are the person who does that culture, right? You are the people, when someone is outside of that culture that you believe you want to live in, that you take them aside and say, hey, that's not how we behave. You go for what you might see as conflict, but you do it because you care for them and you care for your culture. So those are some of the things that I can offer you. And so I am now open for questions.
Okay. So thank you for giving your speech and sharing your experience. So now I'm going to conduct the question and answer section. The first question that some of us have for you is, did you always know that you wanted to serve in the military?
So I wasn't in the military. I was married to it, Marine. That's where I just ended up. Okay, that's where God sent me. Because of DC. So when you live in Washington D.C. or outside of it, because it's highly federal, many of the jobs are either contractors for the federal government, or it's a federal or civilian job. And so I started off as a contractor. The 2-star admiral was a Navy captain. I started working for him as his administrator, his admin, and in an organization called DARPA, Defense Acquisition Research Project Agency. It's a purple federal agency that does all kinds of technology. And I was hired to support him in a new program. We stood up that organization together, and after 3 years of working, he was taken to NAVSEA to get into the shipbuilding. And so I just moved with him, and as he grew, my position grew. And then eventually, because of the tasks and responsibilities that I had, the authority I had, required me to be a civilian as opposed to a contractor. A contractor cannot tell a federal employee what to do. I cannot be an authority over a contract as a contractor. So I had to become a civilian to do what I was doing.
Why did you choose to be a Marine out of all the branches of the military?
So I wasn't, although I behaved like a Marine. The husband is a Marine, hoorah. I leaned towards the Marine Corps, but I spoke Navy, so I used to tell people I'm bilingual. I speak Navy and I speak Marine Corps, which is different conversations. So I was never really a Marine.
How was your experience while you were in the Navy? How was your experience while you were in the Navy?
Well, it really comes down to leadership. Who do you work for, right? I worked for probably one of the best leaders in the Navy. His name was Admiral Charles Hamilton. He demonstrated leadership behaviors, servant leader. His people knew he cared for them. He was grounded in his approach, in his responsibilities. He was fair. He ensured his people had the resources and the tools they needed to do their job. And my job was to make sure his people always liked him and cared for him. So I would give him a bag of candy. This is called leadership by walking around. I'd give him a bag of candy. I would specifically target an area of his or group, and I say, you have 2 hours on your very busy schedule. You take that bag of candy and you walk and sit at every desk in that group and get to know your people. Who are they? What do they do for you? Spend time with them. I made sure that he met with his military. We had 300 military of the 500. We did what's called ward rooms. So in the military, you have the officer ward room and you have the enlisted ward room. And I made sure that we had breakfast just for him and his military, because he is their senior CO. He is their commanding officer. And they need to know what their commander and officer thinks. They need to be mind melded with him as to where he wants to take that particular shipbuilding program and their organization, right? So as a leader, they knew what he wanted. So when they came to brief him, they knew how he thought and how he thinks. So I would tell you, in the Navy, besides being very proud of helping build the fleet, because we had 24 shipbuilding programs, service, right? Service, you're still as a civilian, you're still doing service. But my service was to my admiral and to his people, right? Doing their job. My job was to ensure that they had what they needed to provide him what he had to have in those shipbuilding programs.
If you could go back in time, would you still choose to follow the path that you did?
Say it again.
If you could go back in time, would you still choose to follow the path that you did?
That's a very interesting question. I've always thought about going back to like 7th grade, and starting over, knowing what I know. I went where God opened the doors for me, right? So I didn't get my degree until I was 52. I had 2 masters at the same time by the time I was 56. I used what God gave me as skill sets, natural inherent skill sets. I am good at administration, writing policy, right? Detail-oriented, right? Leadership. Those are all natural inherent to who I am. And that's how I got to work for that admiral. I didn't have a degree. Sometimes you don't need a degree to go places, right? The only reason I got the degree is because I felt I needed to cement what I was doing in this very technical, engineer-focused organization. So I got the degree to cement what I already was doing. The degree is organizational leadership and management, with a focus on how executive leaders affect the culture, how a leader drives the culture. Your superintendent drives the culture into your school. You become who he is, because that's the rules he puts in place. That's the behavior he shows you in the hallway. So that was that degree. The other degree, the master's, was Human Systems Integration Engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School. There's the engineering. The chairs you're sitting in is Human Systems Integration. The computer you sit in front is Human System Integration. It's the person in the system. So I didn't get my degrees until I was already in rank as a civilian to a Navy captain, right, equal to a colonel. So I went where God took me, right? He opened those doors for me. And so I would say I'm happy with where my life is. I've learned a lot. I've been refined, and I'm standing in front of you because of those experiences.
Are you still in touch with the people that you knew from the Navy?
Some of them. So I retired in 2018. I went back to work. That was 2013. I had 3 surgeries. I had the initial surgery. I had a second surgery in November of 2013. I went back to work part-time in February. And then I had another surgery in June of 2014. And then I went back to work. And then I was promoted to the Deputy Chief of Staff to those 80,000 people. So I was working for the 3-star Admiral. I wanted to try to affect change in the culture at the highest level, because that 3-star drove that toxic culture, right? That culture allowed Aaron Alexis to come in and shoot us, right? When I went to leave, I walked the building, leadership by walking. I went to all the people I knew, and I knew a lot, and said, our friendship is either going to be an acquaintance of someone I knew at work, or we're going to cross the barrier to my retirement, and you're going to be my friend outside. So I probably have 10 people who have maintained that friendship with me. I have people from even before that I have helped in the Navy, young admin workers who I'm still friends with today. You take people with you when you bond with them, right? And you care about them and they care about you. When you step outside of this school and you go on to your careers, some of you are going to be kept, and some of your friends are going to go away, and you're going to get a whole other group of people, right? And so I have about 10. One of them I do lunch every month. I go back to the base and we do lunch.
What did your family think when you told them that you wanted to serve?
Well, I come from a family that are what I call the salt of the earth kind of people. They serve. I was raised with parents who took in pregnant young girls whose family kicked them out. I was raised with people who, we didn't have a lot. We were actually probably more on the lines of poor. My parents would take a loan to get us Christmas presents. That's the income level I came from. My father didn't get a degree until after he had all 4 of us. He put himself back in school and worked 3 jobs. One was a janitor, and we got to help. So my parents were people of service, right? They helped other people. They belonged to a group that collected furniture, right? And then would give it to people who needed it. My parents, my dad was known for picking up someone if they were hitchhiking, buying them, if they say, where do you want to go? Buying them bus tickets or train tickets and helping them get where they're going. So I grew up with a family who had a heart of service towards other and spent what resources they had to help others. So I grew up with that.
Was it difficult as a woman in a position of power in the Navy?
I would tell you, we had this conversation this morning. Because I did administration, and even though I was a chief of staff, I actually was the aide and traveled with the Admiral. Wherever the Admiral went, I traveled with him all around this country. But even though I had that position, because I sat outside the door and I wasn't in a uniform, because normally admirals have an aide, right? A lieutenant or an ensign or a commander or even sometimes a captain. He chose not to do that because they move every 18 months to 3 years, and he didn't want to retrain someone. So he made me that person. And I would have people come up and call me secretary. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a secretary. That's honorable. But it also is, in the government, it's a term of negative because they saw me as less than, right? That engineer who's highly degreed saw me sitting outside the Admiral's office and would talk to me as if I were not intelligent. It did not go well for them, just so you know. But the other thing is, it told me a lot about that person, right? So here's something you should learn. That person sitting outside that important person's door has a relationship with the person on the other side of that door. That person typically is very trusted. It doesn't matter whether they have a degree or they're in a position of true authority. They're a person of authority because they have access to the person they want to see. Never mistreat the people outside the door, because I was the avenue with which someone could get into the door to see the 2-star. And oh, by the way, for 12 years, that 2-star and I sat so that we could hear every conversation he had on the phone or I was having. So now he knew on his staff who had such an ego that they would mistreat his staff. So what do you think that told him? So now he knew how to manage that person. So just because you're in a position that appears not to be in authority, everyone is a leader. Everyone. You are the leader you want. You lead the people around you. People are always looking for a person who is a good leader. So you don't have to be a person of authority. You're a person of authority in your job, your expertise, how you treat other people. And so I did grow to a person of authority. When you're a chief of staff, when you ran programs, so I ran programs. So for shipbuilding, I was responsible for every ship that was christened and commissioned and decommissioned. That was one of my programs. That's a lot of ships. So when I went to an organization, a contractor who built, the shipbuilder, when I walked in the door, I was the authority. I represented that 2-star. How you behave when you have authority is equally important to how you treat others in that authority, right? So as you grow in rank, wherever that is, you got there because of the people around you who helped you get there. You didn't get there on your own. People invested into you, they grew you, they saw the best in you, and they helped you get to be that. And then somewhere God opened that door for you to become that person of authority. So I demanded respect because of my position, right? The chair I sat in, I belonged to the admiral. I got respect as a person, how I behaved in that authority. Does that make sense? Right?
Did you ever think of giving up? And if so, what kept you motivated to keep pushing forward?
Okay, so I'm a resilient kind of girl. And my resiliency, of course, is grounded in my faith, being able to see what my purpose is. But I'm not someone who gives up. I've been run over by a car when I was little, got up and walked to the corner, dusted myself off, not kidding, dusted myself off. This is who I am, right? I do not give up. I am a warrior. I am a lion. My business card has a lion on it, right? I'm a force to be reckoned with. And that's what the people around you, when they talk about me in my retirement, that's the things they talked about. I'm a force to be reckoned with. I don't give in. I don't give up. I do what's right, no matter how hard. And you guys are going to hit some hard things in your life. And maybe some of you already hit hard things. Persevere. Grow your character. Do always what's right. Always. When you speak truth, you're never on the wrong side. Even if truth has to go for conflict, truth is always truth. Live in that, walk it, and persevere. So I've never, ever not given up. Getting shot is not, I think, the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me or happen to me, because I don't see it as bad. I have to tell you, I didn't see getting shot bad. It was difficult, it was painful, right? But I have joy inside of me that says, no matter what happens to me, I'm gonna go forward. With humor, with goodness, with purpose. That's how you become resilient, okay?
What advice would you give anybody that's interested in the military or Navy or any other branches?
Hoorah. That's the Marine Corps. Anybody know? No, okay, got it. Nobody knows the Marine Corps. Hoorah. The Army is hooah. I like hoorah. But that is a wonderful place to serve. If you've got 007 in you, go for it. You're at the age where adventure is yours. If you stay unattached, okay? Gentlemen and ladies, focus on yourselves, not the boy or the girl, right? You got a life of your own. You have to become a whole person before you become a whole couple. Go find that adventure. The military takes you on 007 adventures. They give you skills and capabilities and training that you can take and go anywhere you want to go when you get out of the military. They can pay for an education if you want them to. But you have to be ready for discipline, right? Working for people that sometimes you're like, this is a horrible leader, right? But there's adventure. So at your ages, take the adventure, because you're not going to ever have it again. Because once you get attached or you start a career somewhere else, you become embedded and that adventure goes away, right? So take the adventure if you want to do that. The military is a great way to do that. It's a great way to serve.
Did your experiences in the Navy prior to the shooting somehow make it easier to deal with the events of the mass shooting?
Security training, right? Heavily into security, understood law enforcement. Our friend matrix is made up of NCIS, FBI, CIA, DIA, Defense Investigative Agency, if nobody doesn't know what DIA is. Law enforcement, military, that's our friend matrix. So those are the people we're drawn to anyway, and then being in a civilian, law enforcement, being in security, I was trained and I was ready, right? ID him. Because that's what you have to do in circumstances. You have to be clear of mind and actually identify what's happening around you, right? So in law enforcement, criminal, social work, you have to have people ID things to you, right? That's important. So I would tell you just my training as I grew and the people are in my life.
I know you mentioned that you don't suffer from any form of PTSD, but do you ever feel any form of survivor's guilt for the events that happened?
Not. Sorry. A little pointed there, isn't it? I was where I was supposed to be. In my world, in my faith, that's where God planned me to be. He protected me the way he wanted me to protect me. He shot me right where you could get shot. I had one physician in the National Rehab. He couldn't get past that I lived. He couldn't get past that I still had my arm and that I was using it. And he finally brought me drawings of the inside of your arm and said, that's how you got shot. And that's how I know God shot me exactly where I needed to be shot to keep my arm. Not this is all the higher I can do it because I don't have those muscles anymore. Because while I was standing on the stairwell, if God had not brought me peace and I had moved, if I had done this, it would have blown off my arm and I'd be dead. If I had done this, it would have hit me right here in the chest and I'd be dead. Milliseconds, millimeters, because I was at peace and I stood exactly, and in the video I talked about, I felt like I had someone with their hands on my shoulder, keeping me still, and I was at peace, so I didn't want to run, right? Most people are going to see that, and they're going to freeze or run. But because I stood still and I was quiet, I got shot where I was supposed to be shot. So I was where I belonged, and I'm here because I was there. Purpose, right? When tragedy hits you, look for what is the purpose, because there's a reason. What you do with it for good is what helps you move forward, right? If you get stuck in it, you become the victim. That's a victim, someone who gets stuck in it. Don't get stuck. Find the good that come out of it and move forward. So I was where I was supposed to be.
Do you and the other 3 survivors from that day still communicate with one another?
Chip and I, well, not Chip. No. Jennifer, the contractor, she never came back to work. She came from a very dysfunctional family. I spent a lot of time with her. Her mother, when she moved out of the house, turned her room into her glorified closet. And when she was injured, she refused to change it back, so her daughter had a place to live. They made her live on the couch. She eventually went and lived with her father. They were divorced. She went to live with her father. Her father bought her a puppy. And when she went to move out of the house to take the puppy with her, father said, "Oh no, we're keeping the puppy. You can't have the puppy." Very dysfunctional. And in meeting both the mother and the father, because I had that opportunity because I was getting to know her and trying to help her, she was not resilient. She didn't have faith. She was grounded in nothing. And she, for the first year, never got off her couch. She stayed in her pajamas. Stayed in her pajamas for the first year. She did not have within herself or anyone around her to help her. About a year and a half, I lost touch with her. A year and a half after that, I called her just to see how she was doing. She had finally picked herself up. She moved to Italy and got into garden to table holistic food. And she had just moved back to the States and was looking for a 4- and 5-star bed and breakfast to go work, to do garden to table. And she clearly had moved on, but she sat on the couch for a year in her pajamas. And I spent a lot of time with her. The other one, I called her Crunchy. For the first year, she was Crunchy. She came back to work 2 weeks after the event because she wanted to get away from her family. And a year later, she went away for a month somewhere where they got her help. And when she came back, she wasn't kind of a crunchy personality. She still works there. When I retired, all of that went away. The policeman, we probably stayed in contact maybe a year after the event. He was crunchy too. But no, I don't really talk to them because our lives are not really part of each other. Just because you have an event together doesn't necessarily mean that you're connected. Now, I'm connected to Chip, who was on the roof with me, right? I'm connected to Matthew Cooney, the park policeman, who did that. Matter of fact, I connected to the park police for about 3 years after that. I was part of the park police. They used to take me in the helicopter for rides, so I was inside the helicopter, not outside. Look, I've been above the monuments 50 feet, because the park police are the only people who can do that. They took me for the best tour ever. But outside of that, not really, because life moves on, right? You move on. So only Chip, the captain, and I really, that's really it out of the shooting.
How were you able to grow as a person following the incident?
Oh, I think you can tell. As was said to me by a friend the other day, I'm no different today, really, in who I am than I was before the shooting. The shooting did not change me. The shooting just enhanced who I already was, right? It reinforced that much more in who I am, how I'm made. I demonstrated in the basket when I got taken into the hospital, because what I didn't tell you, when I got wheeled in and hit the door and there's 200 people, I sat off the gurney and looked at everybody in the room and said, well, this is quite the welcoming party. That's what I said to them. I am no different today than I was prior to. I was a warrior, a lion. I was Xena the warrior and Gunny before I was shot. And after I'm shot, I'm the same person. I am unchanging. And how that's evidenced is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research and Development, called ASNRDA, she owns all the acquisition. So NAVSEA, SPAWAR, which is the computer folks, and NAVAIR, which is all the airplanes. She owns all the acquisition. Her name was, and nobody could find me. So now you're trying to find your friends and family, right? There's a shooting. And all your coworkers are escaping the building, and all the people who know you want to find you. Are you okay, right? Well, they couldn't find me. And they found everybody but Jen. And I wouldn't answer my cell. I had a flip phone. And I wouldn't answer my cell. And Allison told me she was standing in the Secretary of the Navy's office, and they're watching this go on because they own us, right? So this is like, oh my gosh. She's standing in the Secretary of the Navy's office watching on television, and Dr. Orlowski, who is head of the hospital where I went, the trauma hospital, interviewed and said the woman who arrived with a gunshot wound to her left shoulder is alive and well, and she's telling us what to do, okay? That was me, because I was telling them what to do, and I'm not kidding. When they were stripping me naked, I was making comments about being buck naked in front of the closest friends. Could they please cover me? I mean, I was making comments, right? And so when she said that, Allison told me, she said she and the Secretary of the Navy started to laugh. And she said, I'm sorry, Jen. She said, we now knew where you were. See how well I'm known? That's my personality before I was shot. Even my former admiral, who had then retired, he was watching it. When they heard that, he knew where I was. They went, there's Jen. That's Jen, because that's who I am. Do you change your personality? Do you change who you are, depending on who you're with or what's happening to you? You need to be solid in who you are. I am who I am. I'm unchanging. It doesn't matter what you do to me or what I go through. I am who I am. Right now, I've been modified, I've been refined in most cases, and I've had to learn to take those rough edges off. And I've allowed people like my admiral to help refine me, because I was a pretty tough girl when he got me. I was pretty unrefined. You know, when you grow up in a blue-collar family, you know, you can be pretty tough. Those things I've allowed, but I've not changed the core of who God's made me to be.
What were your thoughts during the shooting, and did it change your view on anything, or specifically life?
No, it just confirmed life for me. It confirmed I am where I'm supposed to be. It confirmed what I believe. It confirmed my right and wrong, my God compass. It confirmed it. It established it firmly. So now I'm absolutely not afraid, right? In today's culture, to speak of my faith. My mother said to me, Jennifer, you can't go into the federal building or anywhere else and talk about God. And I looked at her and I said, says who? Right? You either believe what you believe and stand behind it, or you're going to get squashed. You're going to be like chaff in the wind. You're going to flow with ebb and tide. I have probably spoken to most of the federal agencies in Washington, D.C. And I have been absolutely unafraid to speak of my faith and who I am and how God's made me to go through that trial. Right? Because if I don't tell you the truth, how do you learn to become who you need to be? Right?
This is most likely going to be the last question. What is it like being a survivor of what you went through?
Say that one more time.
What is it like being a survivor of what you went through?
So those of us who have been shot, it's like this small club out there. So Christine Anderson was shot at Virginia Tech, right? So after I was shot, those who have lived that experience, they find you, they reach out to you, and you sit down and have common stories, right? You talk about the event and how they lived through it, how you lived through it, looking for similarities, connection, and the story, right? So I belong to this club. But I have discovered that I'm even more different than them. Christine still cries when she talks about her event. She's still struggling through that. Virginia Tech was, 10 years ago. I have a different perspective of mass shootings than I probably did before I was shot. I have a different understanding of how I'm going to look at it, how I'm going to look at the person who did the shooting, right? We judge the people who do the shooting. We judge their family. After I was shot and we got on the roof, I said to the three men, I want you to do, because I took charge, and I said, I want you to do two things for me. I want you to pray with me. I asked them if they were men of faith. They said yes. I said, I want you to pray with me. And then I want to make sure I'm breathing, because breathing was real important to me. And I led us in prayer. I prayed for the shooter first. I prayed for him because I knew he was going to die. I prayed for his mother and his family because we as a culture don't treat those people well. We see them as if they're guilty somehow. And then I prayed for our safety. So how I look at shootings has changed. The other thing it did for me for law enforcement, although I've always been a proponent of law enforcement, it reminded me that law enforcement is made up of people, and their hearts and spirits and mind get hurt. We seem to see them as unbreakable, maybe, right? We see law enforcement officers and women as, they're out in the street in this battle all the time, so they're impervious to what's happening to them, right? They get jaded at the things they see and experience, and some of them do. But I have to tell you, the preponderance of them, their hearts get broken because they love their community, they want to serve, and when they see the most heinous things, same with social workers, the things you'll see people do to their children, you're not impervious. And what it did is it reminded me that our law enforcement are people first, right? First you're a person and then your career, right? You can't take those apart. So that's something that changed my perspective. I think I already knew it, but it really, really became apparent to me. And then the last story I'll share with you is, I can't think of the channel, the Showtime. Showtime approached to do a series called America Under Fire. They did an 8-part series on mass shootings, essentially. I was not nice to them when they first came to ask me to do that. I said things to them like, I don't want to talk to the people from the fruits and nuts state, right, California. It was really ugly. And it turned out that the producer and the co-producer were probably some of the nicest people you would ever want to meet. And we actually stay in touch to this day. But one of the young women who was on their team, I spent a lot of time with them, and we were at the Park Police and they were filming. And she grew up very liberal. She grew up in San Francisco. She had a couple uncles who were firemen. I think she had an uncle or two that were policemen. But her mindset about law enforcement and them was not really healthy. And she and I were standing there talking, and we were show number 4 in the interview process of the 8. And she looked at me as I got to know her, and I gave her one of my books. She said, I've learned something. She said, I had no idea. After watching interview after interview of policemen and firemen and EMTs who have lived through the mass shootings and helped, she said to me, I didn't see them in a good light. I didn't understand. She said, I've never met people with bigger hearts for everybody around them than I have met as we interview these people. She said, I had no idea. She said, I perceived them in a whole different way, which was negative. And she said, I've had to call my uncles and apologize to them and tell them how proud I am to be their niece and of what they do. She said, I had no idea. Her whole perspective was changed about the life that you guys might choose, right? And how you're perceived by others who don't really understand your heart of service for others. She looked at me and she said, they're willing to give their lives for me. She said, I had no idea. And so that's where you're going, if that's the service you're going to do. Social work, when you meet that family and that child, I don't know how you do that. I couldn't do that. It would break my heart to the point where I wouldn't be able to serve, because I want to do something else with those parents, right? The warrior would come out in me. But that's how we change each other, by really getting to know what's in the heart here to serve. And so I would tell you that's something that I've seen through all of this.
So that pretty much concludes the
Okay.
question and answer portion of your visit, but thank you very much for answering.
You're very welcome. So I would tell you that if you want to talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to chat.